want to take you back to Somalia in 1992. I know there are some people in the audience that were actually accompanying you on that visit. And I suppose the reason I want to speak about it is that my own experience in development started in Somalia a little bit later in the 1990s. And whenever I visited Mogadishu or South Central Baidoa and some of those places, and people would say, so where are you from? And I'd say, I'm Irish. And they'd say, oh, you must know Mary Robinson then. To which I had to say, no, not everybody in Ireland knows everybody else, but here's my chance now to meet you. But the most important thing was, whenever they said that, they remembered that moment so clearly. They remembered you kind of defying protocol and security, and everybody else saying, don't go there. But not only did you go there to speak up for this forgotten crisis, you also did it with such kind of dignity and empathy for the people that were suffering in that devastating famine. So can I take you back to that moment? What was the trip? What did the trip feel like for you? And how's it gone on to shape your career?
Well, firstly, I had to contrive to get there. Once Trócaire and Goal and Concern had come to me and said, is there any way that you could come and help us? We've got this problem of the warring warlords. We can't get food to the feeding stations. It's desperate. And I said, well, no. Bride Rosny said, why don't we arrange for RTE to come and you all meet in Orison and Throne and ask her on television, and she will say yes. That's what happened. Yeah. So that was the first thing. And then the second thing that happened, and I remember it very vividly, was being overwhelmed with a new experience for me of the feeding stations, the long queues of mainly women, but also men holding their young, holding babies, holding 13-year-olds who looked like 8-year-olds, who were dying in their arms because they couldn't get to the, and, you know, stopping to lift a child to say hello, and then the camera saying, President, look this way. And the first couple, I looked, I thought, no, this isn't what it's about. And I decided at that moment, I will not pay any attention. If the cameras are there, they're there. But I'm there for the people. And I remember that being a hugely important moment. You know, just, it was hard. It was hard to kind of just work it out. I'm not here to be photographed. I'm here for the people. And I was so immersed in the engagement with the people that we were meeting, with the whole situation they found themselves, even going into a live theatre and seeing people being amputated because of the conflict, etc., that I didn't have any problems. I was completely on top of everything until in Nairobi, I started to address a press conference. And then somehow what I had heard, everything, it just overwhelmed me. And I found my voice breaking, and I was furious at myself. I was literally furious at myself, because I was the barrister, I was the advocate. I shouldn't be too emotional, but it just got me. And I, you know, found my voice breaking, and afterwards I realized, of course, that was much more powerful, because it was so much how I was trying to tell the world, this is not acceptable, which it was not acceptable then and isn't acceptable in Yemen today. In Yemen today, it's worse. 80,000 children in danger of death. I mean, it is just appalling.
And it is very much being that witness and offering that solidarity that gives so many people hope. But it was relatively new onto your presidency. And I think one of the defining moments of your presidency is that, you know, you changed the role from one of kind of more a figurehead to one of moral leadership, which I hope you'll agree is still as relevant and as important today. You then went on to be UN Human Rights Commissioner. But it was in the kind of late 2000s that climate change became the issue for you. I remember listening this morning to an interview. You said you were quite a late developer to it. But what was your light bulb moment to show that climate change, climate justice needs to be the issue of the moment?
Well, first of all, I was a latecomer because I was the High Commissioner for Human Rights. Human rights was a broad agenda. It was agenda. It was gender. It was Indigenous peoples. It was people with disabilities. It was a broad agenda. Giving that leadership, you know, was both a great honour and a tough job, and especially at the beginning. And then it got better as we built the team, etc. And I knew there was another part of the UN dealing with climate change, and I learned about silos. I was in a silo, and there was another silo. An important lesson to learn. It was when I was working with a small organization called Realizing Rights on economic and social rights in African countries, which means rights to food, health in particular, women, peace and security issues. And I was also honorary president of Oxfam at the time. And Oxfam were, as you like to say, wheeling me out in various parts. So I had a lot of opportunity to see different countries in Africa at different times over 2003, 2004, 2005. And I was hearing the same kind of sentence. Things are so much worse. And unwrapping that, it was, we don't know what's happened. Is God punishing us? We just don't understand. When I was growing up in the village, Constance O'Kellett told me, we had food. We weren't hungry. We weren't rich, but we had enough. And we knew when to sow and when to harvest. But now we have long periods of drought and flash flooding. It's destroyed the village. And this was a story all over Africa. And I realized that I was living in a temporal island, Ireland, and I was in New York. And we weren't hearing this. We weren't seeing this. And it was just so important to understand that this was so unjust. I mean, from an early stage, probably because I grew up between these four brothers that I joke about, but it's true. I had to assert myself. And I have a strong sense of justice. And the injustice of climate change is huge, The parts of the world that suffer disproportionately from the impacts of climate change haven't contributed to greenhouse gas emissions, either historically or now. They don't drive cars. They don't have major manufacturing. And it is so unjust that they don't know what's happening and that it's undermining their food security, and they don't have insurance. They don't have plan B and plan C. And we have to account for that. And that brought me to climate justice and to coming back to Ireland with my foundation on climate justice. And that for me is going to see me out in the sense that I think we really need not just to address climate change, but to do it in a climate justice way, to remember human rights and gender issues, to have a just transition for workers in the coal, in the peat, in the oil mining sectors, that they don't bear the burden. We have a fair sharing, an inclusive discussion. And we're beginning to see that people understand that we need to discuss this more. I would like to see a major discussion. We had the very good report of the People's Convention on climate change, because they had the opportunity to listen to informed voices, and they came up with very good recommendations. We need lots of people in Ireland to understand the issue in this sort of way and to help us to become that leader. It'll take a while because we're a laggard. To go from a laggard to a leader is a big jump. It will hurt, but it'll hurt less in the short term than it would if we waited and almost ran out of time and didn't do things that we need to do. So let's do them now.
Yeah, and I do know you said, we do need to scare people. We do need to get this sense of crisis, but then offer that solution, that just transition. I mean, obviously this week there's COP24 going on in Poland. 12th of December is the 3rd anniversary of the Paris Climate Accord. How optimistic are you?
I believe it's doable. It really is doable. When we had the hole in the ozone layer, and let's not forget, that wasn't so long ago, we thought we'd be fried. And the world came together extraordinarily quickly and banned the things that we put in our fridges that were causing that completely. And we addressed that issue. And when it rose slightly again, it was immediately going to be addressed. Because when the world feels really threatened, you see, the trouble is the countries that are really suffering the impacts are the small island states, are the least developed countries, are the poorest parts of the large developing countries that are now threatening us because they're competitive, but they've got huge poor populations underneath. And it's a disconnect, it's a lack of empathy. Now, let's remember that in 2015, we got two huge agendas. David Donoghue, I gather he was the first lifelong,
That's
whatever.
Right.
So I'm glad to
follow.
Lifelong,
Yeah.
I'm glad to follow in his very large shoes. He and Machario Kamau, whom I got to know very well when we did the El Nino mandate together on climate change, they not only facilitated, they really did a really good job in ensuring that the whole language of the 2030 agenda was a language, as the Minister said, of no one left behind, prioritise the furthest behind first, kind of, have that solidarity. And the trouble is, we don't have a world at the moment of solidarity. We have a world of, a rampant capitalism that's forgotten the social compact. And we have to address that. That's all part of the problem. It's a big, big problem, but we have to address it. But first of all, we have to get our priorities of how we as a country address, particularly moving as quickly as we can, and certainly the 45% by 2030 and carbon neutral by 2050, because that's the route to a safe world.
And you talked there about Ireland being a bit of a laggard at this stage.
I didn't say that. The Taoiseach said that.
The Taoiseach.
Okay. I only repeated him.
I stand corrected.
Endlessly.
I stand corrected. But one thing that has struck me in Ireland about the climate justice movement, and some of our members involved in that, is that it's really captured the imagination of young people, and particularly kind of students in Ireland. We've got the divestment campaign run by Trinity.
Trinity, it was the students in Trinity that got the provost and the board of Trinity to commit to divesting. I helped to get some expertise to help make that possible, because they knew I was, but I loved the fact that it was those young people. And it is young people, it is very young people, it's this 8-year-olds. They are the ones who speak to me very intelligently.
They get it straight away. They really do.
And they know it's their lives. And they're kind of, and I mean, the fact that school children have gone out of classes in Australia, which is a bad country overall on climate. I'm sorry to say that, but it is. It should be much better. It's a bad country.
Yeah. Sorry about Australian in the room.
Sorry about that. I think you'd probably agree. And, having to say that is not something you want to say. But children going out of classrooms, I love it. The fact that the bridges in London are being blocked by climate activists. I'm not saying, activism has to be peaceful, first of all. But there comes a time, and the time has come, when more and more people are going to have to go beyond talk. The time for talk is over. And if governments are not stepping up and are not stepping up properly, then we have to get out there and say, first of all, we have to do ourselves. And this is the message that I'm trying to do in the book and the podcast in a way, and the thing is, take climate seriously in your home, in your family, in what you can do, be more energy efficient, recycle, think about your diet. I've come into a lot of thing about that. I'm not going to go. I'm now a pescatarian, yes. And I'm stopping there. That's
even that piece of lamb, I thought in one of your
no, I've given that up. I've given that up, and it's hard. But I actually think I need my fish and my cheese and my eggs, and to hell with it. Other people can go the vegetarian totally and the vegan route, and good luck to them. They can go beyond it. I'll stop at the pescatarian. But the point is, I've made an effort. And what I'm trying to say to everybody, make it personal. And then when you've made it personal, get cross when you don't see enough happening. When you don't see your Irish government or your European Union or your UN or whatever. That's the point. Right. And I mean, individual choices won't get us there. But individual choices get people to be really concerned. And young people are educating their parents. Young children are coming back from school and talking about, recycling, diet, etc. And that's the hope. I'm a prisoner of hope, which is what I learned from Desmond Tutu.
Great. I'm lapping this up here. Did you hear the break down the silos, guys? Dóchas members, listen out. Activism, and let's get cross. But turning now to the awards, the Lifetime Achievement Award. I know this Dóchas one is going to be up there with Obama's Presidential Medal of Freedom and many other awards.
Well, let's put it this way. I'm still not going to get off the stage. I'm not going to retire.
That's what we like to hear. But really, these awards for Dóchas is very much a celebration of the work of Irish NGOs and of our members. I suppose I'd like to say it's a great privilege to do the work that we do, but sometimes it feels quite tough. And I don't think I'm probably the only one in the room that sometimes thinks, oh gosh, overwhelming. And when times get tough, where do you get your inspiration from?
Well, first of all, I think it is actually very important to celebrate the efforts and the important work that is being done by development, environmental, human rights agencies around the world. It really is important because we need to create, again, that kind of empathy and solidarity for that work. And by celebrating it, we also make it known. And it's very often very private and rather secret and very, very courageous work that doesn't get celebrated enough. I was, you know, in a curious situation in the sense that I would go as High Commissioner for Human Rights to the most difficult places, to Chechnya, when the city was destroyed, and I saw people coming out onto the rubble, and it wasn't safe, to Colombia, which was a very unsafe country at that stage, because people were being killed in enormous numbers, and they would show me photographs of when I'd been before, trade unionists, teachers, ordinary family members who'd just been killed doing their work, lawyers, etc. And then, obviously, various parts of Africa, Democratic Republic of Congo, Goma, Kinshasa. And I would come back to the office energized. And my colleagues would sort of say to me, you know, how come? You know, I know you feel tired, but you seem very energized. And I was energized by the sheer courage of the people that I was meeting. Because it's all very well to come from an office of the UN, or indeed an Irish base of a UN, of an Irish development agency. We live in privileged parts of the world. But to see the courage and the determination and the commitment and how much a little helps and how much they appreciate and all of that, that just fired me up every time, and does still. Every time I'm in a small community and I see what's happening, that's what gives me an extraordinary sense of what life is about, what the purpose is, the solidarity of it. And I just would like to see us return to that 2030 agenda, which had that lovely language of leave no one behind. We have 1 billion people in our world today who never switch a switch for electricity. If they could get the off-grid distributed electricity, they would take themselves out of poverty, out of that grinding, desperate poverty, into the children being able to study, into health, the mother delivering safely, all of that. And it's all doable. And in a way, it's extraordinary that we haven't understood. That's something that we should be setting a target for the world. We'll do this in 5 years. This is the moonshot stuff. Remember the story about John F. Kennedy when he was president, and the Russians had put Yuri Gagarin in space, and you know, America was a bit disturbed about that. And John F. Kennedy said, "We will put a man on the moon in 8 years." It was the most ridiculously impossible thing for any president to say. When it was achieved in those 8 years, the average age at the time in NASA was 26. Which means that the average age when they heard him was 18. So we need moonshot approaches now. We need to get the moonshot of everybody having access to electricity in our world of the 21st century now, not in, you know, literally now. And I mean it, you know. And it's so doable. If we made it a moonshot, we could do it. And we're sending people to Mars. We're putting spaceships up there. I'm not against this, but, you know, in comparison, and the 2.6 billion people, mainly women, who cook on dirty cook stoves, and who ingest and die. So it's all of that. And if I can just say one more thing, because it's a recent thing for me, and I'm so, you know, sometimes you get a gift. I got a gift personally by going to Venice just a week ago for the closing of the Architectural Biennale, because it was curated by 2 Irish women that many of us would know, Grafton architects, Shelley McNamara and Yvonne Farrell. And I walked with Shelley and Yvonne, and Nick was with me, and we had a group. And I was kind of listening to them showing the different projects. And they were all about usable materials, recycling, reusing, but also a great human dimension. And in a way, probably the the one that struck me most of all, because it was the most surprising to me, was a Chinese architect, Keatinge, who works in rural China, very rural China, in villages, 7 villages, and she does architectural acupuncture. So she goes into the village and she listens. She listens to the villagers. What is it that would make a difference? And in one village, it's actually a connection between 2 villages. There was a broken bridge that was actually a risk to go across, but they did use it, but it was risky. Fix the bridge, and in the middle of the bridge, make it an enclosed, a roof on it, so that it could become a place where they would actually meet and, you know, market and talk. And that is exactly what happened. And they had a bamboo theatre in another village, you know, just bamboos bent down. And bamboos are like steel. They're a wonderful you know, sort of thing. And then, because it's acupuncture, it doesn't just stay in one place. It created energy across to the other villages, and they somehow, the 7 villages have now connected. And, you know, what a project. And we're trying to say to people, it's doable to reduce our greenhouse gas emissions, to get out of coal, to get out of peat, to get out of gas, to get out of it quickly, because the world will be better. But we haven't had proper ideas about that better world. And that was what the Biennale in Venice was about. And it was from all over the world. And there were wonderful examples. I mean, I couldn't tell you how enriched I felt. I learned, I couldn't believe what a difference it made to me in understanding what I'm talking about when I say there is a better world and we can get there. And it will be such an enriching world. It will not be the same economic dynamic based on shop till you die. You know, we need you to shop and shop and shop and spend and spend and spend, because that's how we calculate our economies. No, completely different. And, you know, and I think this is very exciting. You know, it's really very exciting that we can move to a different world.
But I mean, another kind of common theme, and through all your stories, is the role of women and women's leadership. And actually, your story around NASA, everybody's got to watch that film, Hidden Histories. Have you seen that?
I have.
And you got those amazing American women scientists. It was brilliant.
Wonderful story.
But onto that theme of women leaders. Obviously, you're the first woman now to get the Dóchas Lifetime Achievement Award. Now that we know it's only happened
one man, one woman.
That was one woman.
That's not a glass ceiling, you know.
But first of all, to ask you, are you comfortable with that idea of being a role model for women and for women leaders?
Yes, I am, to an extent. I really am, because I know that we all need role models. I mean, when I was running for president in 1990, and walking down streets where people didn't know who the hell I was, and that did happen, you know, I wasn't that well known, I knew that there was another woman president in Europe that I could point to, in Iceland, Vigdis Finnbogadóttir. She got elected 4 times. She was, I think, in her 3rd term when I got elected, and she did a 4th term of 4 years. So that was 12 years. We became very good friends, and it was just so important. You have to say there is somebody there. You know, I'm not unique. I'm not trying to. And it's funny. It really does matter. It matters right across the board. And I think mentoring is very important for young women. I'm watching the way that Michelle Obama is becoming a mentor for particularly young girls of African, whether it's American or British or whatever descent, and in Africa itself, just by understanding that she has that role. So yes, I do believe that there is a role of you know, being a model or a mentor or whatever. And at the same time, I don't feel that makes me something special in particular. It's just it's kind of a give back thing that I'm very keen to do.
And I've been reading in the evening my daughter and my son, the rebel stories about rebel girls, and it is those kind of role models that's so important to both the girls and boys. So that's
I was very pleased recently at a conference of women leaders on climate change in Canada that I arrived quite late to. I couldn't get there for the reception on the first evening, which I gather was hilarious and great fun. And they started to talk about bad girls. And Laurence Toubiana outed me as a sophisticated bad girl in my absence. In my absence, I loved it.
Yes, bad girl.
Sophisticated bad girl. That'll do.
Brilliant.
I can live with that.
Okay. Lastly then, because we are almost at Christmas time and that festive spirit, time to reflect back on the year that's gone by and the year ahead. So your highlights for 2018 first.
Survival.
That'll do, right?
Yeah. No, it's been a mixed year because I'm still very concerned. I mean, we had the 1.5 degree report. I think in a way that was a highlight because it was such a light bulb highlight. I was the special representative of the Secretary General before Paris. I remember so well those many meetings, those informal ministerial meetings. They went on, and they were all so boring because America said what you'd expect, China said what you'd expect, Russia said what you'd expect. They all said what you would expect. The small island states said, we will go under if we don't get 1.5. And there was a mantra in the street, 1.5 to stay alive, 1.5 to stay alive. And I thought when we got that new articulation of the goal of where we need to be sustainable, well below 2 degrees, and working for, it was aspirational, working for 1.5 degrees, that was for the small island states and the least developed countries, which I had got to know pretty well and understood, and climate justice was totally on their side. No. When the Paris Climate Agreement asked the scientists to look at this issue for the first time, amazingly, for the first time, and to tell us more, what is the difference between 1.5 degrees and 2 degrees? And secondly, how does the world stay at 1.5 degrees? Amazing that it was post-Paris that the scientists were asked to tell us this. The difference between 1.5 degrees and 2 degrees is huge. I was at an OECD meeting 3 days after the meeting of the IPCC, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change in Korea. I was preceded in talking by a scientist, and I just watched his graphs and his figures and his explanation in, light bulb terms. He was telling me what I didn't know before, and then I spoke afterwards, and now I've taken on board. Between 1.5 and 2 degrees, things happen. The coral reefs go completely. The Arctic ice goes completely. The permafrost begins to melt. That all happens below 2 degrees. And then we don't know what the loopbacks are, and the scientists don't know. And I sat on panels with Rockstrom, what's his name? I sat on 3 panels with him over a period in California and New York. He scares the living daylights out of me. So you can scare people about this, but still, that was what they were saying. So the 1.5 degrees is the only safe, livable world. It won't be as good as it is now, because unfortunately we still are putting emissions up there, but it will be livable. And that is an important message for us all to really grasp. And therefore, the idea of moving much more rapidly, not business as usual, not anything as usual, into a much better world. And that's the good news. Healthier, safer, more equal, better jobs, all of that is there. But we have to imagine it and get there more rapidly. But that was my light bulb in 2018, that this wasn't a 1.5 degrees aspiration for small island states. That actually is the world we have to work our butts off for, because we have to have a safe world, hopefully, for our children and grandchildren. And
But now it's your New Year's resolution list, right? And in my family,
I'm not going beyond pescatarian.
No, because the rule is it has to be fun and achievable, right? So what's your one New Year's resolution for 2019?
I wasn't expecting this. I think to use every opportunity to give people hope. And I think I will do that, because we can't get into a now things have run out of control. We're in danger territory, there's no doubt about that. We haven't too much time, but we have moonshot time. We have that time when we learn in solidarity with each other. It could be a much better world if we can learn that solidarity together and move forward. I don't see it easily at the moment. It's a bumpy time, but we've had bumpy times before, and that's what we need. There's no doubt in my mind that all over the world, people have become aware that things have not only changed, they've become very serious, and we don't have much time, and they're looking for leadership. And it's that kind of, but I think they're also not only looking for it, they absolutely need hope. And maybe that's, the elders can provide that hope. And as chair of the elders, I'll certainly be encouraging my colleagues at all stages, we will have that message of hope.
Brilliant. And that's fantastic. That prisoner of hope. You've given us great inspiration tonight. So thank you very much. It's a great honour to have you here today. I'm now going to ask the Minister and Sharon to present you finally. You do get your award. But thank you very much to Mary Robinson. Thank you.